Hi folks, Wooden Boat Dan here. Just wanted to give you a heads up. The podcast you're about to listen to was recorded several years ago, so some of the phone numbers, email addresses, website links, and time-sensitive information are no longer valid. Please keep that in mind as you listen. If you'd like to contact me, my email address is woodenboatdan@gmail.com. Thank you and enjoy the podcast. Welcome to Hooked on Wooden Boats weekly podcast episode number 20, as in 20. I am your host, Dan Matson, also known as Wooden Boat Dan, and I will be guiding you through our 20th episode today of the world's first podcast, the very, very first in the world that's fully dedicated to celebrating the art, craft, history, and tradition of wooden boats. Welcome back, folks. It is February 2nd. Been a busy day for me. I made a quick trip to Olympia, Washington this morning, about a 2-hour drive. Did an interview with Sam Devlin of Devlin Boats and drove back to my home office, and now I'm editing and putting this episode together, so I hope you really enjoy it. Our featured segment is with Sam today. On that interview, it's about 48 minutes long. So I'm going to make the introduction here fairly brief. I'd love to connect with you. You could call my feedback hotline, voicemail feedback hotline that is, at 424-261-2360. You can email me at dan@hookedonwoodenboats.com. You can find me on facebook.com/woodenboatdan. and twitter.com/woodenboatdan. And you can also just go to my website, hookedonwoodenboats.com. Leave comments on any of my blog posts. For each of the podcasts that I publish, I put some show notes up and have some photographs and stuff. So if you haven't looked at those, I'd encourage you to do that. It's a lot of fun. Hang on a second here. I've got to turn my heater off because it's a little noisy. Okay, I'm back. I did want to mention a couple emails I received in the last week. One was from Pete Leanhouts. Pete is an alumni and a board member of the Northwest School of Wooden Boat Building in Port Townsend. He said he appreciates what I'm doing on my show, and he's part of a group called the Pacific Northwest Maritime Heritage Council, which is a loose group of about 40 maritime-themed organizations located between British Columbia and Northern Oregon. And they meet quarterly, and the co-chairs are Les Bolton from the Grays Harbor Historical Seaport, who I interviewed for episode number 3, which was the first interview I did for this podcast, and Betsy Davis, who is the executive director of the Center for Wooden Boats. And I've been invited to attend the next council meeting in Astoria, Oregon on April 12th or 21st, something like that. So that's pretty cool. And Pete says I'll even be able to give a little spiel about my podcast and what I'm up to. So that's pretty exciting. Also, I got an email from Carl Bischoff. It's a brief email, but it's a good one. It says, just saw this podcast via Wooden Boat. Great to have something really interesting to listen to while exercising in the basement. Carl has a website also, bischoffboatworks.com, where he's building some pretty cool boats here in Seattle. So I'm going to be trying to hook up with him here soon. And I'll probably put a link on the podcast to his website also. Thanks for that note, Carl. And Kip Jensen from Hancock, Minnesota. Hi, Dan. I have found you and have now subscribed and listened to all the podcasts. Very cool. They are great. I guess I am a wooden boat lurker, as I have not yet built one, but I do have plans to start as soon as I can reconfigure my garage shop to be able to do it. I have also heard you mention an upcoming interview with Sam Devlin, and I can't wait. As of now, I think that my very first build might be Sam's Mallard duck boat. Keep up the good work. Kip Jensen, Hancock, Minnesota. Thanks, Kip, for that note. Appreciate the encouragement. I love to get those kind of emails. It keeps me going on this. And so thanks again. I did just get started on my 12-foot sassafras canoe in the past week. Basically, all I've done is I picked up the 3 sheets of plywood and started to lay out my panels on the plywood. So I've got that going, so I'm pretty excited to be started on that. My goal is to have that little boat done before summer so I can get it out on the water and have a little fun this year. Without any further news or anything, we're going to go ahead and move into the interview with Sam Devlin of Tumwater, Washington. If you haven't yet, please visit Sam's website, devlinboat.com. There's a lot of stuff there. So let's go ahead and get started. Take it away. So it is February 2nd, and I am in Olympia, Washington. Actually, this is Tumwater.
Yeah.
Tumwater? I'm in Tumwater, Washington with Sam Devlin. Sam, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Great to have you here, and or I guess I'm not. You're having me here. Anyway, appreciate the time, and let's jump right in here. Tell me about your background growing up, Sam. I noticed on your website you had a little ship's theme room, and your dad had a marine store. And can you tell me about your growing up days?
Well, I grew up in Eugene, Oregon, and when I was very young, I think maybe from about the time I was 4 to 6 or 7, my dad had a paint and marine store, and so he sold marine items and boats and outboard motors and paint, and then at the same time he was busy. He had interest in inventing a marine jet engine, and that was back in the days when that didn't exist. So he and a partner were working on that, and so they had a shop that was behind the paint and marine store, and I was a young kid, and so I used to go hang out with him, and I still remember the smells, and particularly the smells. Well, I do. It was really neat. There was a company that was just behind that called Sweetland Archery, and they made compressed Port Orford cedar arrow shafts. And if you've ever smelled Port Orford cedar, it is the most unbelievably wonderful smelling wood in the world. It's very aromatic.
Wow.
And there was this pervasive smell of it in the air.
Really?
And I very much, even to this day, when I cut into a piece of Port Orford cedar, it'll take me back to my childhood, and I kind of remember, building little model boats or something in my dad's boat shop. That didn't last forever, though.
Yeah.
My dad, about the time that he got the marine jet engine just about dialed in, they basically ran out of money, and so they went bankrupt. And bankruptcy's a funny thing. I think it is way more impactful to adults than it ever is to kids. Kids don't care about that and hardly noticed it, except that one of the byproducts of that bankruptcy was at our home. We had about 16 boats that were kicking around in the yard as Dad slowly sold off the remaining inventory from the boat store, and so we spent a lot of time being pirates out in these empty holes and
out in the yard.
Yeah, so that was kind of fun.
Were those wooden boats, or what were they?
Some were wood.
Yeah.
A lot of them were plywood. That was very common boat building material back in those days. I can still remember the first fiberglassing my dad did on a wood boat, in the basement, and as a project. So,
So was he building wooden boats and selling them at his store?
A little bit.
Yeah.
That was never the major thing that they had done, but they did do some projects.
Yeah.
And my memory's good for those, and every once in a while the family will dredge out some old photos of my older sister and I playing in these boats. Now I'm the second oldest of 8 kids.
Wow.
So there's quite a number of years between the oldest pack and the younger guys. So
yeah.
And they have no memory of that at all. It only the boat thing only affected just two or three of us.
Yeah. So what was your dad making his own designs, or was he building off of plans, or do you know?
He actually, one of the boats that we remember was a Glenelg
Oh, okay.
design, and then another one he did was his own design, and that became the family boat for quite a few years, and then it got traded for a station wagon.
Oh, really?
Yeah, as we had more and more kids, we needed a 9-passenger station wagon. So Dad went down and traded the family boat in for as part of the payment on a 9-passenger Oldsmobile station wagon.
Oh, funny.
I don't know what that would have been.
That's funny.
Maybe 64 or something like that.
So Eugene is inland in Oregon. So people boat on. There's some lakes around there. They go to the ocean.
A couple of lakes.
Okay.
The ocean's about 45, 50 miles away. So.
Yeah. Okay. So not that far to the ocean either if they want to go out.
Yeah, but back in those days, it was quite a jaunt down to, it wasn't the freeways we have now.
Yeah,
so
true.
I can remember we did a lot of deep sea fishing. My dad and I did, and so maybe another tiny little point is I had an older sister and then myself and then another couple of sisters. So, if my dad wanted to have time with a male kid, I was the one that was nominated for that. So
okay.
So we would go salmon fishing down out of Winchester Bay,
Winchester Bay.
which was down on the coast nearest Coos Bay.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's one of the bays that's real famous for the Coast Guard surf boats.
Oh.
It's got a wicked bar, and it always had a healthy reputation. And we'd go down salmon fishing, and it was a major trek to do it because you're driving on these windy little coastal roads, and I can remember looking off over the edge as we're driving down down the embankment into the rivers there, and being kind of scared from that. But we'd go down and Dad had set the herring on the bait. We'd get out over the bar and then inevitably he'd still be kind of maneuvering the boat to get into position, and I'd catch fish or two. And the story he tells most often is the limit back in those days was 3 fish.
Yeah.
And typically I'd have the 3 fish pretty quickly, and then he'd go, well, keep fishing for me. I go, no, I'm not going to do it. Now he claims that it was, some kind of legality thing that I, didn't want to cross that line. I think it was, I think I wanted to go take a nap is what happened. Wake a little kid up at 4 a.m. and drive on a long trip down to the coast. I want to take a nap.
So what kind of boat were you fishing in?
That was the family boat.
Oh, it was, okay. That was the Glenelg?
No, that was a plywood boat that my dad had.
That your dad had built?
Yeah.
Like a 20-foot type of thing, or?
It was, I think it was 18 feet, and it had twin Gale 35s.
Really?
That was sex back in those days.
Yeah.
Twin Gale 35s. These were giant power heads on these engines, and this was more power than anyone could hardly imagine. It was quite the boat.
Oh, that's funny. So when you got out of high school, you went to college and you studied biology and geology or something like that?
I went to the University of Oregon.
Yeah. So how did you get into that field?
Biology and geology.
Yeah.
Well, my other... I never made this public, but my other major interest in life besides boats was wildlife research. I really, really, really loved and always have wildlife and the observation of it. And so when I went through college, one term I worked on a porcupine study over in Eastern Oregon, and then I used to do wolf research through the University of Oregon.
Huh.
And then let's see, I don't remember. I guess that was probably during school too. I worked on a coyote study for a little bit of time. That was my other major love of life was wildlife research, and so there wasn't a wildlife degree program at the University of Oregon, and so one of the things that you could do at the U of O, they had a degree that was called general science, and what you had to do is you had to take the core group of 4 different sciences. It was kind of a neat liberal arts degree. They don't offer it anymore, but back in those days, so you had to take all of the core grouping of studies on 4 different sciences that you could choose, and so I did anthropology, biology, geology, and math. And so you had to take that core stuff, and then you took upper division stuff in 2 of them, and then that gave you this neat little double degree. That,
okay.
So it was more of a launching pad for a graduate career more than anything else.
Yeah.
But it suited. It was a liberal arts education. Frankly, I mean, it suited me because I didn't really want to just get focused down to one thing. I was kind of more interested in several things, and that, to some degree, that's stayed with me. That sort of leaning. In boat types, I'm not interested in just sailboats. I'm not interested in just power boats. I kind of like to flit around, and so it. Anyway, that was what led to that.
Yeah. So what did you do right after you got out of college? And you did some tugboat work or something?
No, I worked my way through school working on tugboats.
Oh, you did?
So I largely put myself through school. After a year or 2, I picked up a scholarship, and the scholarship paid tuition and books. So basically, what I had to cover was my living expenses, and so I had started working on tugboats up in Alaska, and that was
in the summers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and then one time, because I had put myself through school, I worked clear up until the end of winter term. Or fall term, I guess that would have been. So I worked up until the first of the year on one season. So the reason for that was you couldn't hardly spend the money. You're working 12 hours a day, 6 on, 6 off. You were living on the boat. You rarely hit the shore, and so it was a neat way to come back with a pretty good nest egg of money and grub stake of money, I should say, and then that would last me as long as I could last. And
I see.
And so I did that after school.
Were you like a deckhand on those boats?
Deckhand. Okay. Yeah.
And those are probably wooden craft, a lot of them at the time.
A few of them were. After I got some experience, though, we were working on the bigger steel boats that were doing Gulf runs across the Gulf of Alaska. So I've been up to the Pribilofs and out into the Aleutians by boat, and, so that was rougher stuff. Not everyone wanted to do that kind of work.
Right.
Lots of people got sick all the time. So post school, I had met my first wife to be, and I don't want to get too much into the nuance of it. The basics are is we had thought that we would move back to Alaska. That had always been my dream in those days. But I had an opportunity to an old high school and somewhat college friend had an opportunity to set up a business building log homes. So we did that, and we went over to Central Oregon near Sisters, a little place called Camp Sherman, and so we worked on that for a while. That
really building log houses.
Yeah. So it wasn't financially very successful. That was in the middle 70s, and the housing market took a tank, and Central Oregon took a tank, more to the point. I still love it down there. I think it's one of the prettiest places I've ever seen, but very difficult to make a living. So that put me on the road doing construction, because I also had some construction experience in my life, and that's what I would recall as being one of the more unhappy sections of my life. I wasn't very satisfied working construction. I was working on the road. I had just gotten married, and my wife couldn't be with me because we were doing these road jobs. And so in the evenings, I would study boat design and boat building, and I kind of cooked up this idea for stitch and glue, the early thoughts about that, and I did some models for it, and that spent a lot of time thinking about that. Mm-hmm. Now, so one of the things about me, and I'd say the same thing about my kids, is we kind of have a heritage for invention in our family. My grandfather was at various times was an inventor. My dad fooled with this jet marine engine.
Yeah, right.
And it's I don't think it's because we were particularly clever or anything. I think it was sort of this sort of Devlin approach, and
try something different.
Well, what it is, and I observe this a lot in my own kids. It's more that we tend to kind of get interested in something and try to go think through the process ourselves. Not necessarily is there an orientation to go and get formal education in it. It's more, we'll work it out ourselves and come to our own conclusions, and it's just it's a wiring thing in someone's mind, and that kind of process was present with me, and it really was the catalyst for wanting to do this. So here's the story about the wooden boats. The wooden boats, I was working on an old tugboat in Alaska. It was built in 1898, and it was one of my first jobs on tugs. And it was a very nice boat, pretty well maintained, and we were out on a 7 or 8 day trip, and I was off watch. Now, you work 12 hours a day. You work 6 on, 6 off. And if you've ever had a job that does that, it doesn't leave you a lot of time to do anything other than work.
Yeah.
Because you're always chasing, trying to get some sleep and eat in between, your work times. But I do recall I was off watch. And it would have been 1974 that this happened. And I was sitting in the galley drinking some coffee, and there was a nice diesel range there, so it was warm. And I was reading issue number 1 of Wooden Boat magazine. Really? The other deckhand on the boat had picked up this magazine, and it was the issue number 1 of Wooden Boat.
Wow.
And I still recall looking up to the overhead, seeing the tongue and groove planking, and just the smell and the feel of this old tug, and musing to myself, gee, that would be an interesting thing to do. And I never could shake that notion out of my head.
So it was kind of birthed right there in that tugboat.
It really was.
Wow.
But it's also, to some degree, it was me stepping back to my childhood. So to a very large point, I think some of this wanting to build boats and this incredible interest in boats that I've always had in my life is me chasing my childhood. Mm-hmm. My warm fuzzy spot, memory-wise, when I was a kid, was sitting in my dad's boat shop and making little model boats, and the smell of Port Orford cedar in the air. And I think honestly, it's me wanting to just go back to the warm fuzzy point. Yeah. And but boats always have been an important part of my life. I mean, they would crop up in artwork periodically, and I always drew boats, and so it always was there. I never could shake that completely, and that was what caused me to not go down the wildlife research path and to choose the boats thing. Yeah.
So you spent that amount of time in construction, and you didn't really like that. So then what happened after that?
I came home from one of the trips, and I showed my dad these models that I had made, and told him what I'd been fooling with, and he said, well, that's interesting, and he said, why don't you build me a boat? And I told my dad, I said, no, I'm not gonna. I wasn't too ornery about it. He goes, well, why not? And I said, what he had said was he'd put up the material money if I would build him a boat.
Yeah.
I said, if you'll put up the material money for 2 boats, I'll build you a boat and I'll build me a boat. And so he agreed to that. So we built 2 boats. We kind of tried out this method, and he helped me some at that time.
That was your first stitch and glue.
That was the first stitch and glue boat. We really didn't have all of the stitch and glue thing flushed out. We didn't know about the stitch part of it. I had kind of mused about this welding of the plywood together, and I knew that part, and I knew it was possible, but I didn't know the stitching part. So the story is that we were working in this old barn that we had rented for a shop, and I had scaled up these little models that I had made, and I had these full length panels of marine plywood sitting in front of me, and these darts cut in it, which was kind of what you had to do to build a stitch and glue boat in those days. And Dad was there, and I think it was a Saturday maybe, and so we just didn't know how we were going to pull these darts together to form these panels, and we didn't talk to each other, and all of a sudden Dad started walking over to the bench, and all of a sudden I started walking over to the bench. One of us picked up a drill and a little 1/8-inch bit, and the other of us picked up some baling wire, which used to be pretty common in construction in those days, and a pair of pliers, and never speaking a word to each other, we walked back over to the boat, drill a couple of holes, poke some wire up through. The other person had kind of pinched these darts together, and then the other person had twisted up. I don't remember speaking a word to him until we had that boat stitched up. And we both stood back then, it probably took a couple hours, and we had a boat. Something looked like a boat, felt like a boat. It wouldn't have been watertight yet because we hadn't done the gluing part of the process. But we had a boat shape, and it was so instant and so just invigorating that that still has never left me. I still never cease to marvel at how quickly, with stitch and glue method, you can put together a boat and have the thing be a boat shape. I mean, in your first day of working, literally, you've got a boat shape that you're staring at, and that's really good towards the enthusiasm of a project.
Right.
So then we glassed the seams on the boat, and then start down the land of trying to finish the darn thing.
You didn't have epoxy then, though, did you?
I didn't have epoxy then.
Yeah.
No, we used to do it with polyester.
Oh.
So I had a little tiny bit of experience with polyester resin, which is what normal fiberglass boats are built out of.
I see. Okay.
And it will bond onto plywood a little bit. It's not as perfect as the epoxy is.
Yeah.
But it would work, and it worked enough that we continued down the evolutionary path of that process, trying to do that. So, so anyway, a few weeks or month later, we launched those 2 boats. Dad called the first boat Zero. He didn't want to call the first boat Number 1, and he still chuckles when he tells that story. And the other boat, it was a canoe. I'm not sure I ever named it. I think Dad called it Tippy Canoe because we launched both boats the same day. The Zero was the design that we have that we still sell, called the Egret.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and we've had that design for a long time, but. And it's a pretty stable boat, so we launched it on a local lake near Eugene, and
is it a sailboat?
Yeah, it is a sailboat. I think at that time, though, it was just a rowing boat.
Okay.
I don't think we had the sailing rig in it yet.
Yeah.
And so then, and Dad had gotten into it, and he was probably in his 40s at that time, I guess. And So then we launched the canoe, and Dad goes to step in the canoe just with the same grace that he had stepped in the bigger, wider boat, and promptly tipped it over. I was sitting in the back of it, and so he called it Tippy Canoe from then on.
So you built an egret and a canoe.
Yeah.
At the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And was the canoe your design also?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was a stitch and glue canoe made out of panels of wood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then what happened was I did a little 8-foot dinghy design, and it was in between construction jobs. So I had some time, and I decided that I needed to find a way to make so much money that I could work half the year, and then the rest of the year I could go home and build wooden boats, which is what I wanted to do. And I knew you could never make money building wooden boats. So this is in 1977. So with my tugboat experience, now tugs you can make money, but you don't make big money. But 1977 was right when the crab industry was really getting going good, and so those guys had a real problem finding people that wouldn't go out and get sick. So, and I had this sea experience, a lot of sea time, and so I built 3 little 8-foot dinghies, and sold them in a little garage sale, and that gave me seed money. I bought a one-way plane ticket to Kodiak, Alaska.
Do you remember how much you sold those boats for, Sam?
I think $325.
Really?
Yeah. But it may have been $150. I mean, that was a while ago, so I'm not sure. But my wife, we had some friends that had a greenhouse business in Portland, Oregon, so she had arranged to go up and help them through their busy season, and so I bought this one-way ticket up to Kodiak, and I get a job on a crab boat. We did a 4-day trip, and which was a little shorter trip than normal in those days. Came back, and they had to do an inspection on the boat, and it's complicated why that happened, but anyway, I couldn't stay on the boat. Now, typically, when you work on boats in Alaska, you always stay on the boats, and I didn't have a place to stay, so one of the other deckhands said, well, come and stay with us. Now, in 4 days, I don't remember sleeping. Swear to God, I don't remember sleeping. Must have, but it wasn't in a bunk, and we were really tired. And then that was a boat that was mostly...
That was 4 days on the boat?
Yeah, it was mostly a Norwegian crew. There were a lot of Norwegian cussing. And so anyway, we went to this deckhand's. I don't remember a civil word coming from him either, but you're just rummy after that. So but nevertheless, I went home, and we slept for about, I think the story I usually tell is that we slept for 22 hours. And we both got up about the same time. We were really worn out, and we were having breakfast. And I don't remember what time of the day it was, but we were eating breakfasty kind of stuff, pancakes and bacon and eggs, and we got to talking. And this fellow, he had moved and had a young family in Kodiak. He really wanted to stay up there. He really wanted to make a stake up there, and so he was interested in having a little sailboat that he could explore the local waters up there. And so I sketched him up something, and we talked about where we would build it. And I had this shop in Eugene with tools and stuff, so it was more logical than up in Kodiak where we didn't have anything. And he gave me a deposit check. I bought a one-way ticket back to Oregon, and started working on the boat.
So you had your first pre-sale.
Yeah, it was the first pre-sale, except that it didn't happen.
Oh.
What would happen was I'd take pictures, and I didn't have great pictures. I think we had a Polaroid camera back in those days. And so I would take a couple pictures of the boat, and I'd write them this letter, we need to get another draw on the boat. And here's where we're at. And so I'd send it up to Kodiak, and then I'd wait a week, because it took a week to get mail up there.
Yeah.
And then I'd wait another week because I had to wait for a reply to come back, and then I'd wait another week because he might have been out at sea when I got there, and then I'd wait another week because he might not have answered it right away. And the bottom line is he never gave me another dime.
Oh, really?
And my dad was observing all this happening, and one day he comes over to the shop and he says, "You're starving to death." And I said, "Yeah, I know." And he goes, "And you keep working on the boat?" I said, "Yeah, I know." And he goes, "Why don't you go talk to my..." He had a friend that was a banker. "Why don't you go talk to Glenn, this guy, and see if he'll give you a loan to finish that boat?" And so I said, "Oh, do you think I can?" And he goes, "Yeah, well, give it a try." And so I went and talked to Glenn and got a loan and finished the boat, and really honestly from that point on, we never really caught up with the projects. We were always a little bit behind, and there was always a project to do. I mean,
so you started getting orders for boats and stuff.
Yeah.
And this was with your dad still down in Oregon?
No, not with my dad.
Okay.
Just me.
Okay.
And then fairly quickly, I picked up one of my younger brothers started working with me. He was still in high school, but it was summertime, and he would work with me. And then we picked up another fellow that started working with us. So it kind of pretty quickly it sort of became a business.
Really? Okay. So then, when did you move up here to Olympia area, Sam?
It would be 30 years this coming fall.
So tell me about that decision and why you came up here.
Well, we'd started the business in Eugene, but I always knew it wasn't the perfect place for a boat building business. There's a old, funny story that if you want to be a boat builder, you start at the coast, you put a oar over your shoulder, and you start walking inland, and you set up your boat shop wherever someone says, "What's that thing on your shoulder?" And but in all reality, Eugene wasn't a hotbed for wooden boat building. It wasn't bad. There was a couple of big reservoirs, but in the long run, I really wanted to get on saltwater.
Yeah.
And so, and I also had a deal with my wife that we wouldn't start a family until we got on saltwater. So we started casting about. We did a trip back up to Alaska. We still mused on the Alaska thing and looked very hard at Haines, Alaska, of moving the shop up there. And that was a nice place. I think we could have done it, but we decided no, we better do Puget Sound. And so in Puget Sound, we selected 3 areas: Olympia, Anacortes, and Port Townsend. We had already had a relationship with Carol Hossey at Hossey and Port Townsend Sales.
Yeah.
And and we'd gone to the Port Townsend Boat Festival for several years already, and we liked it up there. So we did a road trip looking at the 3 areas. I had a grandfather that lived in the Olympia area, so we scoured around Olympia, found what did become the shop that we chose, and we looked at Anacortes, we looked at Port Townsend. Carol, I still remember her, the conversation. We were having lunch or dinner, and she said, "Well, Port Townsend's a great place, but having a business here is like 24-hour Gestalt therapy. Everyone knows your business all the time." And I had, when we were in Eugene, we were fairly isolated, and we had gotten used to that idea that everyone wasn't staring down over our shoulder all the time, and there was something freeing about that.
Yeah.
And I took her advice to heart. But the other thing that we had used in our selection process was that we knew that we weren't going and buying a place. I mean, we've never made that much money in this business, so we had to lease, and I knew that if the move took over 2 weeks, it would be devastating to us.
Oh.
So the real selection process was which facility was the most compatible with being up and running by the start of that third week, and
For your new shop.
for the new shop. And so Olympia, won hands down. I mean, it was the most compatible. It had been a boat shop before we moved there, and for a few years, and it was the most compatible with that. So we chose Olympia. Plus, it was close to my grandfather, and that was kind of nice. And so we moved. We moved 3 employees up, and my wife and I, and then I called in every friend I could think of to help us with this move. I think at one time and it was October 17th, I recall that, was the last bit of moving that we did, and I think there was 17 different cars full of stuff, trucks full of stuff with trailers behind it and stuff. I mean, it was like the Clampetts moving to Hollywood. And
probably some unfinished boats.
Oh yeah, lumber, and it was hard to move a business.
Wow.
And so we moved up, and I remember the rain. It had been a nice fall, and it started raining at Centralia. It didn't quit raining for 3 months. Yeah. Every day rain, and I'm a Northwest boy. I grew up in Oregon, but it's wet up here compared to Oregon.
Compared to
way
Eugene,
wetter.
There's a lot more.
So we have this funny little saying in Eugene or in Oregon. If you had some 2x4s that were some part of some summer project, and you had left them laying out in the yard over winter, usually the next spring they were still usable. In Olympia, there's no way. They were just totally rotted. So there was a big difference there, and we lived in the shop. We couldn't find places to rent. This is a college town, so most of the cheap places to rent were gobbled up by then, and school had already started, and so we lived in the shop for a couple of months. And this is kind of a funny story, but nevertheless, it's a story. We and I had promised my wife we wouldn't start a family until we moved to Saltwater. Well, 9 months, almost to the day after we moved, my oldest son was born.
Oh, really?
So evidently we started that right away. My landlords called him Barney for about the first 5 years of his life because he was conceived in the barn.
Oh, funny. So, Sam, out of all the boats you've designed and built over the years, tell me about a couple of your personal favorites.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a hard one. That's a hard one. I'll tell you a couple of stories. I love stories. So,
yeah.
I'll tell you the story of Nancy's China, which is a little 15-foot sailboat. We were still at the shop in Oregon, and we used to do 9 boat shows. And kind of was our boat show season. Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot.
Those boat shows and sportsman shows. And, all of that started early January. The first show of the season was in Portland, Oregon. And it was grueling doing these shows. I mean, it really was.
Yeah.
But we had a little boat that we were building called the Eider, and it had been pretty successful for us. And that was a little 17-foot boat, and had a little cabin, and we had built it for a few years, and it had started out life pretty simple, and then as the production ramped up on that, we sold more boats. They got more and more complex, i.e., more and more expensive. So I'm working the Portland Boat Show, and I believe it's 1980. It was the year that President Reagan was inaugurated. So. And this is right at inauguration time, and the first day of the boat show, it started on a Friday, was we sold 3 boats.
Wow.
Now, most people don't remember when President Reagan was inaugurated, one of the first things he did when he was in office was he froze the Fed Reserve funds. Inflation was galloping along, and he viewed that as a big demon, and so he froze the Fed funds. when they froze the Fed, that meant banks couldn't borrow money. And if banks couldn't borrow money, they wouldn't loan money. So the first day of the show, I sold 3 boats. This was half a year's worth of work for us. First show of the season, I was on cloud 9. But all 3 of the sales were subject to bank financing. And by late Friday, we knew that we had lost all 3 of those sales. And I still had 9 more days of that show to do, plus all the rest of the shows I had to do that season. And I was demoralized. I went from being just as happy as a lousy wooden boat builder can get to the darkest despair. Finished the boat show, didn't sell anything, nothing sold. And we lost all 3 of those sales. So I went home and I told myself, I said, okay, I'm going to design a boat that someone will pay cash for. We won't be subject to bank financing. And I had a theory in those days that there was this price point of about $5,000, and that anything below that, people quite often would just pay cash for. And anything above that quite often had some bank financing involved in it. So this is the first time we designed a boat for a specific price point, and it was a spec design. And while I was working on the design, and everything about it was designed to fall underneath this $5,000 price point, I had picked on just underneath that, and it had to be the package, had to be the boat, sails, and trailer. So it was ready to go.
Yeah.
And so while I was working on the design, and I was at a doctor's office or dentist's office or something, and I was reading a Time magazine, and I was reading about Nancy Reagan buying China for the White House, and they gave the price of a place setting of this China, and it was exactly the same price as I had chosen for my little design. And I thought to myself, wow, there's my name. I'll call it Nancy's China. And I didn't think in the long run. I always knew some people would get it, some people wouldn't.
Yeah.
I'm not a Republican, never will be. And so I grew up in Oregon, a little bit more liberal minded, and so I didn't mind having a bit of a protest to the Reagan era, and I thought that the people that didn't get it, they'd think maybe my wife's name was Nancy or something. That in the long run it wouldn't hurt the boat design, the name, that it had some legs to it, but that the people that got it would like it.
Yeah.
So that became the Nancy's China design, and that was how we chose on the name for Nancy's China. So
yeah.
Same price.
You've sold a lot of those over the years.
That's been a successful boat for us. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. So what about your personal boating these days, Sam? Are you getting out on the water? And tell me what boats you're using when you have time.
Yeah. Well,
if you have time.
Not much. So one of the new things that's happened with the economic downturn is, I think all of us that boat have revised our boating dreams inward. I don't think that we've quit dreaming about boating. No, so boating's kind of complicated. I mean, part of boating is anticipated boating, part of it's actual boating, and then part of it is desired boating.
I like that description.
And so I thought it was always one of the important things about a wooden boat was that they're a little bit whimsical anyway, just on their own, and that they play very well to the first 2 categories. Well, they played all 3 of those categories, but but I have noticed that I have not done much actual boating, that's been much more restricted, and that my dreams of that boating have revised inward. They haven't disappeared, but instead of me thinking of taking my bigger boat up to Alaska and back on a seasonal basis, I now fantasize about getting out for a couple of weekends. You know, and in fact, I'm fantasizing more and more about just getting out for an afternoon, or an evening. And so as that's happening, I'm kind of revising the boats that, you know. So we have an old salmon troller that we've converted into a pleasure boat, and it's too big and too much hassle to take out for an evening of poking around. So what we've wanted to do is more sailing. So we're fooling more with some of these smaller sailboats, the little pocket cruisers, and my wife has a little Nancy's China. We take that out once in a while, and this marsh wren design that we have in the shop, if we finish it and it doesn't sell right away, that'll be our little cruiser boat, not cruiser, our little day sailor boat for some evening things. And then I have a little a Candlefish 13 that's my personal boat, and I just take my dog out in that, and it's got a little 20-horse outboard, and I can blast around in our bay. We live pretty close to the water. We're not on the water, but close to it. So it's, you know, a quarter of a mile to the launch ramp, and it's pretty easy for me to slip out if I want. Yeah. And more of this is me wanting to. I want to boat more, and the hard part's been trying to figure out how not to work quite as much and have some time to boat. And I wouldn't say that I've got that very refined yet, but I desire to refine it.
You're working on that.
Yeah. So it's an imperfect thing. So
you use any paddle or rowing boats at all?
Well, I have a little rowing boat, and I'm thinking about it. The hard part where we live is it's very tidal, so you can't just launch there anytime you want to. You know, you've got to try to find when the water's up high enough that you can get a little boat out to the end of the dock and get it. So I'm musing about going back to some rowing boats for exercise, but that's never been a perfect thing for us because of the tide. It's 15-foot tide range, and you know, so during the summer,
that's
the big low tides are in the middle of the day. So quite often it's mud in front of the shop there, and in front of at the little local launch ramp. That's where our old shop is, and so I've got to kind of work around that. The new shop is closer to downtown, so it may be that I'll keep something down at the dock downtown. I've got several slips that I maintain here, and you know, so I'll kind of see. I'm not sure yet.
Okay, all right. So we're going to wrap it up here pretty quick, Sam. Just one other question I had. What about your other shop that you used to be at? What's going on over there?
My kids have it rented, and so my oldest son, Cooper, has a 48-foot old powerboat built in 1938 that he's restoring. And then my youngest son, Mackenzie, he has one of our Arctic Tern sailboats that he's doing a refit on that. And so they've got it jam-packed full of boats right now. And
so they have a business there, or they just...
No, they both work here.
Oh, I see, okay.
But they have their personal projects going on there, and they've kept the shop open for that, so they work evenings and weekends on that. And we're on 410s here, so they have a 3-day weekend, so they can put a fair amount of time into that if they want to.
Very cool, very cool. Well, Sam, could you give us your contact information for people listening that want to get in touch with you?
Sure. Our telephones are 360 area code 866-0164, and our address here in Olympia, Tumwater, is 3010 37th Avenue Southwest, Tumwater, and the zip code is 98512, and our website is devlinboat.com, and my email is sam@devlinboat.com.
Very cool. Okay. Well, I really appreciate your time today, Sam. Any parting comments for our listeners? Anything else you'd like to add?
Well, we're starting our 35th year of building boats. We're at 427 boats now. I still haven't gotten bored with it, and I still really like boats, and I love that we can do such a broad variety of boats, and the stitch and glue medium has really been wonderful for that. It's made us possible, and it's not been a very conventional life, but I really like it, and it's really been wonderful. We've had the opportunity to do this, and hope to do it a bunch more years.
Good, very good. Well, great. Well, thanks for your time, Sam. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Talk to you later. Sam, wanted to say thanks again for taking the time to let me come to your shop and giving me a tour and spending quite a bit of time with me. I really appreciate it. You've got a fascinating story, and I wish you well in your business, and I hope our listeners today really enjoyed that interview. Anyway, that's pretty much it for today, folks. Tune in again next Thursday for the next episode of Hooked on Wooden Boats. And don't forget to connect with me at my voicemail feedback hotline at 424-261-2360 or email me at dan@hookedonwoodenboats.com. You can also find me on Facebook and Twitter under Wooden Boat Dan, or you can go directly to my website, hookedonwoodenboats.com. Have a great week. This is Wooden Boat Dan. Over and out. Keep the sunny side up and the barnacled side down. We will see you next week. Thanks again.